Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Building Investment Strategies that Unlock Funding. My name is Mary Ellen Kuntz. I lead the TrailNation Collaborative here at Rails to Trails Conservancy and will be moderating today's session. Today's webinar is hosted by Rails to Trails Conservancy's TrailNation Collaborative. The Collaborative is a nationwide peer learning community that brings together advocates, leaders, and professionals from across disciplines to work together to establish and accelerate connected trail and active transportation networks all across the country. To date, we have over 7,000 people signed up for the collaborative. This resource provides proven tools, methods, and additional resources, including the TrailNation Playbook. Combined with RTC's expertise and that of you, our network of partners all across the country, we come together to find solutions to challenges and barriers, working to accelerate the development of connected trail systems in our communities. This opportunity is free and open for all, and we welcome professionals and advocates in the trail and active transportation fields, as well as the many adjacent fields. This is the final session of our TrailNation Playbook in Action webinar series for 2023, and that we've revisited all year. With the launch of the TrailNation Collaborative earlier this year, we're pleased to offer what we call the TrailNation Playbook. This is an online resource and guide for creating multi-use trail networks. The playbook curates case studies, effective practices, and tools as a resource for trail planners, municipalities, states, and regions that are working to advance their own regional trail projects. This resource is based off of more than a decade of working with hundreds of partners across all 9 of our TrailNation projects to envision, plan, organize, fund, and activate trail networks. These TrailNation projects serve as the learning laboratory for understanding effective strategies to accelerate trail network development. Through this work, 6 different elements emerged as critical to the success of networks: project vision, coalition building, mapping and analytics, gap filling, today's topic, the investment strategy, and of course, engagement. Many of you know that the process for developing a single trail, nonetheless an entire network, isn't linear. And there is no one-size-fits-all approach that can be easily replicated from project to project. While different communities and regions might have to take different approaches based on their unique circumstances, we're seeing these elements as critical to success. This webinar is just one of a series that highlights all 6 elements of the playbook. These discussions have highlighted the application of some of the tools you'll find in the playbook and will help to paint a more detailed picture of how different regions and coalitions are approaching this work. Today, we are joined by 3 experts in building investment strategies as laid out in the TrailNation Playbook. First up is Wade Johnston, a certified planner and executive director at Tri-State Trails, who is leading the way for trails, walking, and biking in the greater Cincinnati region. Andy Bemis is joining us from the City of Tucson's Department of Transportation and Mobility, where he serves as the planning administrator. And finally, we'll introduce you to Joe Reed, RTC's Director of Government Relations, to discuss federal funding opportunities to consider as you develop your trail network's investment strategy. With that, I'll hand it over to Wade.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Mary Ellen. Again, I'm Wade Johnston. I'm the Executive Director of Tri-State Trails, and I'm excited to talk with you all today about how we have leveraged local, state, federal, and private funding to build out our regional trail network here in greater Cincinnati. Next slide, please. So to get started, I'll tell you a little bit about our organization. Tri-State Trails is a nonprofit advocacy organization that is working to connect and expand our trail and bikeway network in the tri-state. If you're not familiar with the geography of the Midwest, Cincinnati, Ohio is located at the southwest corner of Ohio, and right across the Ohio River is Northern Kentucky. About 30 minutes away is Southeast Indiana. So in that 10-county region that we serve, there's about 220 local governments, and there's a real need for collaboration and planning to get those local governments to work together. So we provide technical assistance to those local governments, as well as nonprofits and community groups. We collect data on our trails, and we promote our trail network so that people can use it and it's seen as an amenity for our region. Next slide. So the project I'm going to tell you about today is called the Crown, which stands for the Cincinnati Riding or Walking Network. And this is our vision to build a 34-mile trail loop around the city of Cincinnati. The Crown plays on one of Cincinnati's most iconic monikers, which is the Queen City of the West. And the reason I'm telling you this is because the brand that we created for this project was really instrumental, I think, in being able to articulate a persuasive vision that people believed in and wanted to see come to fruition. Next slide. So the Crown really builds on the past success that Cincinnati has had with the Little Miami Scenic Trail. So the Little Miami Trail was one of the first rail trails in the country. It originally was built out of a small town called Loveland, Ohio, that really embraced the trail as the front door to their community. And it has since expanded to become a 78-mile trail that's part of the 326-mile Ohio to Erie Trail, which goes all the way to Cleveland. If you zoom in here, you can see this is what the Crown loop is, shown in yellow. The premise of this project is to connect 4 trails that have been in development for a number of years to form this 34-mile trail loop. The Little Miami Scenic Trail is one of those corridors, as well as the Ohio River Trail, the Wasson Way, and the Mill Creek Greenway. So as context for how we got to this point of developing a trail network, we started with performing a feasibility study. Back in 2015, before we had the momentum that we do now, we had 4 nonprofit groups or community groups that were trying to get their project built, really competing for the same resources from the city of Cincinnati and our county park district, Great Parks. And we came together with so many partners to create this vision and understand how much will it cost, and is it possible? What routes should we use to connect these trails? So coming out of that process, we created the branding for the Crown and started to market it to the public. What really put the wind in our sails was packaging 25 miles of that 34-mile loop to sell as a fundraising opportunity to raise local match dollars. So often our local governments have so many competing needs for where to spend their capital budgets, and not having resources available for trails privately was a barrier that made it difficult to get the city and the county's attention to build projects in a really bold, transformative way. They were building incremental pieces here and there, but what we said was, if you build this trail network and prioritize these projects that will make really high impact connections, then we will raise the money for the local match. And the way that we were able to do that was by forming a really robust public-private partnership that was led by 4 nonprofit organizations and really critical partnerships with the city of Cincinnati, our county park district, Great Parks of Hamilton County, and SORTA, Southwest Ohio Regional Transit Authority, which is our bus system and owns a lot of rail property. So we said back in 2015, or I'm sorry, 2019, which was the first grant that we were able to secure under this partnership, that we would be stronger together in fundraising for this whole trail network rather than trying to do one piece at a time. And the success has been instrumental in being able to make this project happen. From 2017 to 2019, we did a lot of community engagement that really led up to that point. In 2019, we got our first grant, $6 million surface transportation block grant that aimed to build out the Wasson Way Trail corridor, which was a real key project of our former mayor. And we said, like I said, we will raise the local match money if you're able to make this trail happen and connect it to Uptown, our region's 2nd largest employment hub. So coming out of the success of being awarded that grant, the pressure was on to start raising money. We set out to raise $7 million. We increased that in the process, and ultimately we ended up raising 10. And this was during the height of the pandemic. We were preparing to launch our campaign in March 2020, and obviously our plans changed. So we pivoted, and I think we were fortunate that trails were so heavily used during the pandemic that it really articulated the need to continue these types of projects and invest more in them. And so since we've launched that campaign, and a little bit prior, as we're counting up all the dollars involved, there have been $55 million in local, federal, and state funding that have been leveraged because of this partnership. And when you break it down, if you go to the next slide, our MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, OKI Regional Council of Governments, has been our largest funder for this program, funneling in those federal transportation dollars. The state of Ohio has also been a really huge partner. So the funding strategy that we advised the city and the county and many other partners on was, instead of going after smaller transportation alternatives grants to do, a half a mile at a time, let's go big for a surface transportation block grant or a congestion mitigation air quality grant. And that first $6 million was a great precedent-setting opportunity that it is possible. And our MPO awarded the grant. And then we were able to leverage for the local match that we needed to raise, the 20%, a funding source out of the state of Ohio called the Clean Ohio Trails Fund. So the secret sauce here is getting all these grants to line up. The administration of it is complicated. The city and the county are administering these grants, and we really appreciate their partnership in that way. And the Clean Ohio Trails Fund is something, as we look at our landscape locally of Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio, it's unique because it's been around for a long time. You can get $500,000 for a project every year. And our strategy for building out this trail network has been, for every regular occurring grant opportunity, we got to put a grant in the hopper. And almost every time since then, we have been able to secure some funding of some kind. So we're getting large federal grants, matching them with state grants from the Clean Ohio Trails Fund, and then that's minimizing the burden to the local taxpayers. And we're ultimately reimbursing the city for that local match that they're paying to get the project executed. So like I said before, the campaign was really critical in convincing the public and elected officials, the business community, everyone, that this project was important. If you go to the next slide, we had a very grassroots organized campaign to start. We had yard signs, we had stickers, we had T-shirts. We even spray painted the logo of the crown with spray chalk on our trails to just raise awareness about this project. And after we had kind of reached that tipping point of people being interested in the project, it really helped us get the momentum we needed to move forward. Next slide, we held bike rides with elected officials to show them where the opportunities are and where the challenges are, so that we can let them have firsthand experience of good trails and physical separation from cars, and then riding with traffic on a really busy street. So when we put it out to the public, there was already some pretty good awareness about it, and we were really amazed that so many people contributed. Over 500 donors contributed a wide range of gifts from $1 to $1 million. That was the pitch: is anything you can give will make a difference. The next slide shows how we were able to use that campaign and the branding for the crown to package sponsor donor recognition opportunities. So for our largest donors, we created these donor recognition opportunities that played on the imagery of the crown. Next slide. So we're fortunate with a lot of Fortune 500 companies here in town. Kroger Health and P&G were two of our $1 million donors. Also United Dairy Farmers, which is a local convenience store, and one foundation, the Marjorie Charles Schott Foundation, each contributed $1 million to support our campaign. And having that huge chunk already raised allowed for smaller grants to fill in the gaps and help us reach that $10 million goal. Go to the next slide. So now I've got some just photos to show you how we did it and what it looks like now. So a lot of these projects were rail trails or were railroads and have turned into rail trails. Inactive lines that were not being used that are now repurposed into these wonderful public spaces that are getting so much use by the community. The next slide shows how, that the image before was a bridge over the highway. This is reconnecting communities that have been bisected by the highway and connecting them together so that it's safe to walk and bike between them once again. The next slide shows a section that we literally cut the ribbon on this morning that has been in the works. This was the last piece of that 2019 grant that we got, was finally executed, and it looks great. It's connecting or setting the stage to connect to our second largest employment hub. So all the people who live in these densely populated areas will have a safe way to ride their bike or walk to work. Next slide shows another example of this is a railroad that was going through a park, heavily used, sat there. This was a trestle. It sat there for decades, just derelict. And now it is a vibrant trail corridor that is going to be transformative for future generations. Next slide. There were also some really challenging pinch points that required a lot of money and creative thinking to get done. This is called the Beachmont Bridge. This is where the Little Miami Trail was had terminated at the front door of the city of Cincinnati for 5 years or so. This project was 20 years in the making, and thanks to the leadership of our county park district, Great Parks, this project was possible with a tunnel under a highway ramp, retaining wall, and a bridge over a state and national scenic river. It doesn't get a whole lot more complicated than this. And we still have one more piece that we're working on completing, another rail trail that would activate an inactive line to connect where the Beachmont Bridge ends to our downtown. So there's still more work to be done. We've been really focused on getting the asphalt down, and we're starting to see some of these improvements come along too with public art and landscaping. And as you all know, having a starting point is a great way to get the momentum you need to keep moving. So that is the last slide that I have, and look forward to questions later in the presentation.
Thank you so much, Wade. Congrats again on this morning's ribbon cutting, and for fitting us into your busy schedule today with that going on. Really exciting to see all of the great work happening across the Cincinnati region. Next up is Andy to talk about his work in Tucson.
Hi, thanks everybody. Wow, that was such an impressive presentation and trail system. Great job on your work there, Wade. My name is Andy Bemis. I'm a planning administrator for the Department of Transportation and Mobility in Tucson, and here to talk to you about some of our funding strategies here locally. So in this presentation, I'll give a little bit of Tucson context for those of you who aren't familiar with our desert Southwest city. I'll talk a bit about how we fund active transportation projects, in general, and then focus on a few local funding initiatives specifically. So a little context for Tucson. The metropolitan area is about 1 million people. It's the second largest city in Arizona. The city population just over about half of that, so 500,000. Tucson was an early mover in active transportation, particularly in bike networks. We started attacking some of the low-hanging fruit on our major street network in the early 90s and adding bike lanes before a lot of cities were. And as a result of that work and my predecessors, we have over 1,000 miles of bike lanes in the region. Over 90% of the major street network has at least a painted bike lane on it. And then, significantly when it comes to trails, there's over 180 miles of paved off-street greenway and trail network between the city of Tucson and Pima County. There's a network called the Loop that follows our dry riverbed system around the desert with grade separation at all major crossings, and it's really fantastic. And as a result, we have pretty high, bicycle commuting rates. At one point, I think we were the 7th, where we float around 10th or 12th now. I think some other cities are passing us by, but nevertheless, a lot of people on bikes in Tucson. Unfortunately, though, we do have some very serious active transportation safety concerns, especially for people walking, people biking. This is a clip from Smart Growth America's recent Dangerous by Design report. We're the 13th most dangerous city for pedestrians in America. And when it comes to biking, it's not that much better. If you go to the next slide. We've been a bicycle and pedestrian safety focused city and state by the FHWA since 2015. On the left of the screen there, just showing some of our bicycle safety metrics from our League of American Bicyclists bicycle friendly community report card. Relative to the average platinum community, very high bicycle severe injury and fatal crash rates, unfortunately. So we have a lot of work to do in that regard. And next slide. To address that, I'll talk about a few planning initiatives we've done, which have really rolled straight into our funding strategies. And so back in 2015, we started work on a bicycle boulevard master plan. We recognized that, on our major streets, with high traffic speeds and volumes, we're going to need to be looking at protected bike lanes. A lot of the low hanging fruit was done, and those were more complex, kind of capital intensive projects. But we have this great opportunity in Tucson in that we have a great residential grid with really good crosstown connectivity on local streets. And so we developed this plan that proposes 64 different corridors across the city, 190 miles of residential street networks, prioritized and optimized for people walking and biking with traffic calming, traffic diversion, push button crossings to help stop traffic and help people walking and biking cross streets at every major street crossing, and connections into that 180-mile shared use path network that I discussed. Our council approved this plan back in 2017, and at the time, it was this lofty vision, a great idea. We had 2 existing bike boulevards, so proposing 64 more, big price tag, didn't know what we were going to be able to pull off. And I'll be happy to be able to report we're making good progress on implementing this network now. I'll talk about that a little later. The next plan I'll talk about is on the heels of that. We realized in around 2019, we had all these competing plans. So we had a bike boulevard master plan, we had a regional freight plan, we had a transit plan, but we didn't really have one kind of comprehensive strategic transportation vision for the city, over the long term. So we embarked on a master planning effort called Move Tucson to try and do that, synthesize all the plans we have, ultimately try and produce a prioritized list of both project and program recommendations to improve transportation and mobility and access and equity in Tucson over the next 20 years. About a 2-year planning process. We approved it in late 2021. This is a screenshot of the network recommendations map. So all the kind of capital projects that were proposed of all scales, from new high capacity transit projects, streetcar extensions, new greenway extensions, bike boulevards, protected bike lanes, you name it, new roads and bridges. Also, out of Move Tucson came a recommended funding strategy. So the plan obviously had a large price tag. We looked at kind of what our level of investment is in all these different areas, capital infrastructure projects, programs, maintenance, repair, traffic safety, bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And we made some ambitious, but we hoped achievable funding targets over the 20-year horizon of Move Tucson. And with that, I'll talk a little bit about our funding strategies for how we're trying to achieve those targets. Next slide. But first, I do want to just mention a little bit of the policy foundation for how, as we move through this in 2020, or 2019, coinciding with that kicking off the Move Tucson effort, we passed a complete streets policy for Tucson. And out of that, we also updated our street design guide to really reflect best practice for street design when it comes to serving, active transportation users and street safety. So those are really kind of forming the foundation of how we design our streets and how we prioritize our projects moving forward. So when it comes to funding projects in Tucson, yes, we are casting a wide net. We're trying to, secure as much funding as we can. We have a big list of projects, like I said, with a big price tag. On the federal level, we're definitely the recipient, and we're keeping our eyes on a lot of the formula funds that come through our region and our program through our MPO, surface transportation block grants and transportation set-aside funds, CMAQ funds, highway safety improvement funds. And then we've been, with IIJA and the recent kind of growth of direct discretionary grants, we've been really successful in receiving a Reconnecting Communities pilot program grant from the first round. We've got another application into the Reconnecting Neighborhoods program in the second round. We were successful with the Safe Streets for All grant. We were successful with the RAISE grant, and all these are, primarily in support of active transportation projects. And then we've also been successful working with our elected congressional representatives at securing some earmarks and congressionally directed spending for projects. Of course, we have state shared revenues. That's our gas tax and vehicle license taxes. We have a regional half-cent sales tax administered by the Regional Transportation Authority of Pima County. And then locally, we've gone after several bond initiatives that I'll get into a little more detail in for the sake of this presentation. So with those local funding initiatives, I'll do a little history tour here in Tucson. Starting back in, we had Prop 101 back in 2012, and that was a sales tax initiative really meant for road repair and maintenance. So voters approved a 5-year half-cent sales tax to reconstruct both major streets and neighborhood streets. Obviously, that gave us a lot of opportunity because when you're reconstructing a street, you have an opportunity to look at how it's striped and make improvements. We did a lot of road diets, lane narrowing, lane removal to add bike lanes, protected bike lanes, buffered bike lanes, and get better multimodal infrastructure in. So it wasn't primarily an active transportation plan, but we definitely piggybacked on it to use it in that way. When that sunsetted in 2017, we took it back to the voters and extended it for another 5 years, also focused on pavement reconstruction and rehabilitation. That kind of at the time was really our community's primary concern and need with the state of our streets. Having made a lot of progress in that area through those initiatives, in 2018, there's a recognition that we can be doing more, and we really need to do more both for our parks and our connections, our active transportation, biking and walking connections to those parks and throughout town, making the spokes to that wheel of the shared use path network that we have in Tucson. So this was a 2018 bond. It's a general obligation bond meant to fund parks and connections. I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. It passed. It's a 10-year initiative, and it's helping fund a lot of the projects that we put in that came directly from the Bike Boulevard Master Plan and with Tucson, or excuse me, Bike Boulevard Master Plan. One more thing to say on the last slide. Finally, in 2022, we brought another, when the Prop 409, that pavement half-cent sales tax expired, we brought it back to the community and said, hey, we'd like to extend it, and this time we're going to do more than pavement too. We're going to split it, so part of it's pavement and part of it is going to fund even more safety needs. So and I'll talk more about those categories in a minute. So with the first one, Prop 47 Parks and Connections Bond, like I said, that was a general obligation bond paid for leveraging our property taxes. It's a 10-year initiative. It generates $225 million over those 10 years in total. About 91 million of those are for active transportation projects, the rest being for parks improvements. On the map, you can see the network of corridors that will be improved under this program. And you can see that the colored lines correspond with what type of infrastructure. So there are 9 different greenways, and these are completely off-street shared use paths, totaling 18 miles of new path. What's not shown on the map is the existing network to see where where we're tying into. But in the orange, yellow color, there's 10 projects are pedestrian safety and walkability. These are connected, ADA networks on major commercial centers, on major streets with new signalized crossings and pedestrian safety improvements, landscaping, lighting. And then finally, there's 34 bicycle safety and mobility projects totaling over 100 miles. That's about half of the Bike Boulevard network from the Bicycle Boulevard Master Plan I mentioned earlier, plus a group of protected bike lanes as well. And we're about a third or approaching halfway through that program right now. It's been very successful, and I'm really excited to report on that. There's a progress tracking map on the link that I think we can post so you can see where we're at in terms of delivering all those projects with those local funds. Finally, the next one I'll talk about in a little more detail was our 2022 initiative, Prop 411, which carved out funding. Again, that was a sales tax initiative. And that we rather than identifying the kind of named projects like we had done in Prop 407, we carved out buckets of funding. We kind of had earned the trust of our community and our voters to say, look, you can trust the city when we pass one of these initiatives, we're going to deliver on our promise. So rather than then we're always trying to balance that dance between retaining some flexibility for changing future conditions, both in terms of revenue or project costs or project needs, and transparency and accountability. So, we want to leave some funds unspecified so that we have that flexibility in the future, but we also want to be transparent and accountable and make clear what we're going to deliver. With this project, we carved out basically buckets of funding, and the community said, yeah, we agree, we trust you to do this. This will be about $150 million over 10 years for biking and walking improvements, for system-wide safety improvements, and for some traffic signal technology and upgrades. The other half of this is for residential pavement. So all those kind of dark colored spots you see on the screen are projects that are getting resurfaced. Because that proposition was less specific, so we didn't name the actual projects. We said, we're going to take guidance from Move Tucson, and we plan to spend this much money in these areas. Voters, what do you think? We also said, well, we're going to work with the Citizens Oversight Commission on how we'll spend those. So there'll be some we added that layer of transparency and accountability. We bring our project ideas and cost estimates forward to a appointed group of citizen volunteers to approve and move with us over the years as we scale, the revenue generation with project costs to deliver the program. One of the lessons learned I do want to share, having gone through this process, both on the, a general obligation bond, which has a fixed sort of revenue, how, within some margins, how much you're going to get. And we also, with that plan, we fixed the projects. So we said, this is what we're going to build and this is how much money we're going to have. Well, what we've seen is with a lot of cost escalation, a lot of cities are seeing our prices are going up, but our revenue with that is fixed. So we do, we're in a bind right now trying to recognizing we need to bring additional funds to the table to deliver that program, which thankfully to a lot of the federal discretionary grants and the other funding sources I mentioned earlier, I think we're going to be able to do. But with the second, Prop 411 here, where we didn't specify the projects, and it's tied to a sales tax, whereas when inflation rises and costs increase, sales tax revenues also tend to increase. So they haven't kept up necessarily with project costs, but at least with a sales tax initiative, your revenue is going to scale somewhat with inflation, even as your project costs scale. So just some things to think about when you're putting together a local funding initiative. How it's paid for, is that revenue side going to scale with project costs or not, and trying to play that balance between transparency and flexibility. I think that's all I have to share from Tucson, but happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. I'm learning so much during today's webinar. I hope that you will all put your questions in the chat. I've got a long list next to me to ask Andy and Wade and Joe, who I'm turning it over to right now to talk about federal funding.
Well, thank you, Mary Ellen. And good afternoon or good morning to some of you on the West Coast. I'm Joseph Reed. I'm the new Director of Government Relations here at Rails Trails Conservancy. And Andy and Mary Ellen have already said this, but congrats again, Wade. That's some great work you're doing out there. But in my presentation, I will briefly highlight federal funding streams that you all can utilize to help fund trails and active transportation programs in your area. And I should note that there are state administered funding streams as well, which I'll briefly touch on later, but the focus of this presentation will be on the federal programs. So let's dive right into that, into the federal programs for active transportation. And again, these are initiatives specifically designed to promote walking, cycling, and other non-motorized transportation modes. And I should note that the three programs I'm about to discuss today all have the funding thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law enacted 2 years ago by the Biden administration. And yeah, now it's next slide. All right, thank you. Well, the Transportation Alternatives Program. Now, this is a critical source of funding for trails and active transportation projects across the country. And this program mainly gets its funding from the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which states and local communities can use to address their specific transportation needs. And again, this is funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law, and now it has a budget of $1.44 billion. That's billion with a B. And this supports a wide range of projects, including pedestrian and bicycle facilities, community improvements, safe routes to school, and more. Needless to say, it's a huge boost for active transportation nationwide. In the next slide. And next, the Federal Highway Administration has allocated funding to states for the recreational trails program since 1992. And RTP receives $84 million annually for trail development and maintenance, and is partially funded by $281 million in annual gas tax receipts. And RTP funds support for trails, maintaining and building non-motorized and motorized paths with a balanced allocations about 30% for each, but 40% for, plus 40% for other users. And these funds also cover safety, environment, and training, as well as administration. Next slide. And this is a program that I've been working on a lot since I came to Rails for Trails. It's the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program, or ATIP, as we call it. And again, this is another program established under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and it's administered by the Federal Highway Administration, and it received an allocation of $45 million in fiscal year 23. Now, while this is a critical step, I should note that this falls far short of the envisioned $200 million initially promised to it, which we at RTC will continue to advocate for in the future. And ATIP focuses on creating safe and convenient walking and biking routes, connecting active transportation networks, and addressing gaps in trails between communities. Now, the notice for funding opportunity, or NOFO, if you're new to this area, for ATIP is expected to be announced soon, maybe even today, who knows? So stay tuned to our website and your email, and we'll update you as soon as we have news. And also, I'll also look at the Department of Transportation website as well, since they may drop the press release at any moment. Next slide. So apart from direct federal competitive grant programs, there are several federal initiatives to have criteria or provisions allowing for active transportation related projects. Next slide. And that includes RAISE grants. They fund various infrastructure projects with a focus on fairness, meaning half the funds go to rural areas and half go to urban. And it was established in 2009. And this program has supported projects such as roads, railways, transit, ports, with nearly $14.4 billion granted over 15 rounds of funding. And the Department of Transportation 2 weeks ago just announced that its 16th round with $1.5 billion available. And it's a huge opportunity for communities and organizations. And I advise all of you to go to the DOT website to learn a little more about the specifics of the opportunity if you would like to know a little more. Perfect. Next slide. Okay. So the Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program. Now this initiative, again, under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and has $1 billion of allocation over the next 5 years. And it aims to bridge gaps in communities, enhance connectivity, ensure equitable access to transportation, and foster economic opportunities. For those interested in applying for these grants, I would regularly check for updates and notices from DOT, as they provide detailed information on the application and procedures, far more than I could give in this presentation here. Next slide, perfect. Okay, so the Safe Streets for All grant program. Now this aims to prevent roadway deaths and injuries with $5 billion allocated from 2022 to 2026. And again, this comes from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And in fiscal year 2023, in the first round, DOT provided $82 million in grants for 235 communities. And these funds will support safety projects such as separated bike lanes and curb extensions and projects like that. And a bit of breaking news today, DOT announced that they awarded $817 million in Safe Streets for All grants to 385 communities. That's up from the last round where we had 235. And we're still going through all the grant awards at RTC, so I can't give you much more information on this webinar. But if you want more information on the awards, I recommend reviewing the most recent press release on DOT's website. And I should note that the application for the next round of these grants is anticipated to open around like February of 2024. So stay tuned for that. Next, perfect. And I just wanted to touch briefly on a few notable state administered programs with active transportation eligibility. Now, I also know, again, this is a very small snapshot of the programs that are out there. And many of these names are self-explanatory, so I don't think I should go too deep into it, but you see the carbon reduction program that, of course, aims to reduce carbon emissions through projects such as public transportation, alternative fuels, and focuses on both urban and rural consultation. Then you have the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which aims to reduce traffic fatalities and injuries. Then the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program, which uses $8.1 billion in funding to address traffic congestion and air quality, which indirectly aids in emissions reduction by promoting alternative transportation modes and enhancing traffic flow. And I mentioned this program briefly earlier, but the Surface Transportation Block Grant, and it emphasizes safety, innovation, and efficient project delivery, which allows states flexibility in addressing their transportation needs. And this program provides roughly $15 billion in funding. And that's just a few examples of programs that can provide significant financial support for the development of trails and overall active transportation. But ultimately, the effectiveness and success of these initiatives hinge on the strategic priorities that you will establish and how you advocate with your policymakers in seeking funding through these programs. And with that, Marilyn, I'll just toss back to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Before I forget, we are going to have plenty of time for Q&A, so please keep those questions coming. But I want to make sure that our next webinar, the Celebrate Trails Day Partner Planning webinar, is on everybody's schedules. This is our last session of the year, so we'll kick off 2024 with this on January 9th at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can go to that link on your screen or forthcoming in the chat to register for that. And of course, to save the date for Celebrate Trails Day on April 27th this coming year. All right, I think we've got everybody here. There we go. Andy, we're going to bring you back on screen if you don't mind. There we are. Perfect. So I think one of the first questions I have, thank you all for joining us today. I've learned so much from the three of you, and I know everybody in the audience has as well. One of the things that I'm really curious, Andy and Wade, you've both applied for so much funding over the years. We hear a lot that, and we know it takes a lot of resources and a lot of energy. How do you keep that energy up for the long term to just keep applying for funding over and over again?
I'll go first. Well, I guess two things I'll say to that. One is just on a personal passion level, like I do this work because I like building things and you need money to do that. And so I'm never going to stop, definitely want to do that. It's part of our job. Also institutionally, I'm supported by that. And we've kind of working for a local government, we've staffed up in that area. So we, especially after the IIJA, our grant application stuff was not that centralized in the city or in the Department of Transportation. We were doing a lot of it in our planning group because we're, looking at our future plans, projects we want to build and that kind of thing. But we realized there's going to be a lot of need. And so we hired just for our department, a grant writer to specialize in that with a transportation background. So that's been really helpful. So we have someone focused on that. So we've been successful in getting a lot more grants. Right now, we're in the position of, a lot of those grants, especially the federal ones, come with like a non-trivial administrative burden, right? And so actually staffing up in the kind of compliance, tracking, reporting, and closeout, there's needs that come along with those grants too. So that's something we need to stay on top of. But yeah, in terms of maintaining the energy, that part's not hard. It's always exciting seeing the new NOFAs come out, new grant funding opportunities. And that's part of the puzzle that I like to play, is what is the grant opportunity for the right project at the right time. and that's just part of the fun of transportation programming.
Thinking about it as a puzzle is definitely a good approach, I think, when building an investment strategy. What about you, Wade?
Yeah, I think a puzzle is a great analogy to how we get these projects built. For us, we have relied heavily on our partners for applying for some of these grants. The city of Cincinnati, for example, has a very well-staffed Department of Transportation and Engineering, and a lot of our role is helping create the political will for specific projects to move forward in the prioritization process within the city to ultimately be above the line for the city to apply for a grant. But in our politically fragmented geography, there are a handful of cities or smaller villages, I should say, that the Crown will go through, and they don't have that type of capacity on staff. So we have helped them write grants before and lean on consultants as well to be able to get all of the compliance and administration pieces done to deliver the projects.
Thanks so much. And on that note, I want to dive a little bit more into political will building and those tools for engagement. Wade, you had mentioned during your presentation very, very briefly, it was quite a spectacular flyby about getting local electeds to come on your rides. Can you talk about how that's played into the process? And Andy and Joe, I would love your insights as well about how having that political will and having those people in positions of power can help to support getting these trails built.
I think for us, it has been the critical link to make any of these projects happen. On one side of it, the public definitely wants to see more trail investment. When our park district sends out surveys to see how they should spend their levy dollars, building more trails consistently comes up as the #1 priority. But translating that public priority to political action definitely takes work. So I think one of the strategies that we've done to be successful is just go to communities and like we have neighborhood councils. So we try to build that political will in the neighborhoods and ask them to be a part of our team and send letters of support to the city and ask for these projects to be delivered. So we're all singing from the same songbook. And then, we do a lot of events as a part of our work, and being visible, I think, is important to showing that this work is relevant and necessary. And one of the photos I showed was from our Meet the Candidates ride. So our city council is elected every 2 years. And that's a pretty quick turnaround if you're running for office to run right again. So we organize this bike ride pretty much annually leading up to the election. So everybody's in campaign mode, and we try to get a huge turnout from the public. Normally we have like 80 or 100 people. And when you bring that type of turnout to a campaign event, they pay attention. And I think also just the personal outreach to elected officials and showing them the trail corridors firsthand that you want to build before they are built, because seeing is believing. And that worked with donors too, showing them what the opportunity was and how close the trail was to connecting to a destination. It changes hearts and minds.
I'd like to just piggyback on that. Wade, I agree with everything you just said. I've always said all politics are local. Well, I didn't come up with that phrase, but you don't know the phrase. And just meeting with local electeds and being able to translate that into policy that works on the local level, state level, and we can use it on the federal level. And then taking some of these officials on bike rides, just showing them the actual project. That again, that helps so much in any type of advocacy that's done. So I was going to make a larger comment, but you basically said it all right there. I agree 100%.
I'll have a little bit to say on that topic too. And I think first I'll say I've been really lucky. I think in Tucson, we've had really strong political will and leadership for traffic safety and active transportation and trail networks in my decade working there. But I do think it's kind of political will is kind of like pavement maintenance. It's always there. It's something you always have to be doing. I think we've had that political will because of work of decades from advocacy organizations, from city delivering projects, from, over time. And it always takes refreshing, and that work continues. I think we have some really strong advocacy organizations in Tucson that have been keeping our city, holding our feet to the fire as the city and being really in close touch, engaging and showing the kind of demand for that is often, not seen for active transportation projects. From our perspective at the city, we're changing the way we do things when we're in. So good planning efforts, like the ones I mentioned, have fed in, because throughout that planning effort, you're showing, like, look, this is what we're hearing from the public, this is what we're wanting, and we're in discussion with all our electeds throughout, so they kind of see it as we go. When we have project funding and we're getting into the design of a project, we're really doing a lot of alternative outreach. That's a presentation all in and of itself, but rather than holding the nighttime public meeting in a community center with 4 usual suspects who don't like anything, we're doing it in the park, and we're offering free ice cream and free mobile bike repair, and we're showing a family-friendly movie, after the sun goes down, and we're getting tremendous turnout, and it's turnout from people, with their children on their bikes, with their dogs, and it's a more informal setting, and we invite the ward staff there with us, so they see and they hear firsthand. Actually, people really have traffic safety concerns. They really want to bike more. They'd like to be able to cross their street, and hearing more of kind of the needs that throughout. So I just think that political will, it's like, thankfully we're in a good place now. Policy windows come and go with who's in the seat at the right time, and it's always something you need to be working on.
And I'll add one more thing, Mary Ellen, that I should have mentioned before,
Go
is
for
that the business community, like, we have made the case to our local businesses that we need this amenity to be able to attract and retain talent, and they get it. And so having our chamber on board, having businesses, contribute with their own dollars, it is also persuasive to getting the elected officials to see the vision.
If I may, Marianne, I noticed there was a question in the Q&A that basically to that point on my presentation. So that's a good transition, maybe.
I was going to tee that up for you next.
Okay. The question was about, what kind of coalitions we built around the local funding initiatives. It's a really good one. And I'll say in each of them, I think we're strategic, and we did have really good support, even from, groups traditionally opposed to new taxes. We had the chambers supportive. We had the, Association of Transportation Builders. We had obviously all the kind of traffic safety and parks advocacy groups supportive. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, the sales tax initiatives were blended themselves. So we noticed through some polling, through our planning, our parks needed a lot of improvement. We knew that would go really well. We thought, so attaching our active transportation improvements to the parks initiative, you kind of couple them, right? So people who like one are going to vote for it, but you kind of get both audiences. We did the same thing with our first go around with the pavement. So it was, all right, well, we're going to resurface this pavement, but we also want to make all this, safety improvements and pedestrian improvements and bicycle improvements, and they're together. So for people who might not care about the bike ped improvements, but they really want to see more pavement, they're voting for it. People who really want the bike ped improvements and may care less about the pavement, they're voting for it. So we tried to structure them in such a way that everybody got a piece of the pie. And I think as a result, we got success. Also, you got to think about the size of the levy, half cent, full cent, whatever, what's your threshold or the tolerance for your community. And then the time. So are you asking for 5 years? That's a little more palatable than 10 or 20. So, those sorts of things, hopefully you have your finger on the pulse of your community and you kind of find the sweet spot. But yeah, the coalition building, very important.
Thank you so much. I would be remiss to say that Celebrate Trails Day in April is a really great opportunity for everyone on the call to invite your local electeds. We've had events in most of these places, so it's one of those really great opportunities to invite the people who are representing you, whether that's on your city council or in the halls of Congress, to make sure that they know what's going on in their community. And also, it's a great day to get outside. So Joe, we've got just a couple minutes left. I have a question for you, Joe. We are seeing really incredible network development happening in Cincinnati, in Tucson, and in so many other places across the country. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about kind of the big picture thinking around funding and why we're seeing this happen, and how that can be prioritized elsewhere. Like what are some of the other places and why are they doing it?
Like as far as federal, just make sure I understand the question.
I think across the board, I think we're really curious to hear about the return on investment for trails, maybe why the government's prioritizing this right now, all sorts of stuff in the mix there.
Well, of course, the focus on trails we just can't, well, we're still technically kind of in the pandemic, kind of not out of the pandemic, but regardless, I think the lockdown had put a focus on the need for trails, the need for walking, the need to be more active. So that's why we saw like a huge investment in the past. And I would say like as we look toward the future, in our current political environment, I don't know if we can look to a super increase in funding in a number of these programs, but we want to be able to maintain funding across the board. So that I think, well, I know that we want to make sure that everyone on the call stays engaged with the policymakers to make sure that what gains that we have made do not disappear in the future. Because again, like if you look to like what's going on in Congress right now with federal funding, we are currently we could be looking at a shutdown come January or February, which would be disastrous. But we want to make sure that we again, we just don't lose the gains that we made. We made so many improvements, gains during this past year with the bipartisan infrastructure law and all the programs I just mentioned. So I would say like moving forward, we just gotta be aware, just aware and engaged, and making sure that we all like stay in communication to make sure that we don't take any steps back, because that is a possibility. I don't want to be like a pessimistic, and I'm not saying that at all, but we just have to be hyper aware of any backstepping that might happen in the coming fiscal year.
Joe, that's such an important point. You're certainly talking about like making sure that we're demonstrating demand,
Yes.
making sure that you're getting those grant applications in so that everybody, whether you're applying for state and regional grants from your MPO or your state DOT, all the way up to a raise grant, other federal funding, making sure that you're doing everything in your power to keep applying. We talked about how they're always applying for things. They're always showing that there's demand for trail funding. That's an incredible piece of this puzzle. And I also know, like, we're wrapping up today's session. You've all dropped so many incredible resources into the chat and into your conversation, into the conversation today. We're gonna put all of that, if you're still with us, that will all be included in the follow-up email. I want to make sure to thank Andy and Wade and Joe for all of the work that you're doing to make the outdoors safe and accessible for all, so that we can all get all the places that we want to be with these incredible trail networks. Please let us know. Please reach out to us with any additional questions, and we will see you in the new year with more webinars soon.